Do you play video games, or do video games play you? Remember the "would you kindly" reveal from the first BioShock, where, super old spoiler alert, you realized everything you thought you knew was a lie and you were actually just being controlled the entire time? Well, I'm here to tell you that's pretty much the case for almost every video game you've ever played, and there's a good reason for that. Because while developers may claim player agency and choice sets video games apart from other mediums, what they're actually talking about is little more than an illusion. On the one hand, strategy games like League of Legends have very limited objectives, yet because their systems demand so much of the player, your input does vastly affect the game. But even in strategy games, referring to free will and choice in a fixed system is paradoxical, because even when games rely on player input, their systems still work independently of our will. How you progress is ultimately up to you, but in a game like League of Legends, there has to be a winner and a loser. On the other side of the choice scale are games like Mass Effect and Telltale's The Walking Dead. Funnily enough, even though these kinds of games present themselves as a bastion of player choice, your ability to affect them is very limited. If you've ever replayed these types of games to choose a different dialogue option or save a different person, you probably noticed something revealing. Your decisions, they don't really change the game that much. Because even in so-called branching narratives, designers don't have infinite funds to create infinite paths, so they compromise. Don't get me wrong, game makers are always coming up with creative new ways to work around the paradox of player agency. Interactive fiction game 80 Days, which is one of my recent favorites, got rid of typical story limitations like cutscenes and voice acting, giving players a seemingly infinite number of different outcomes and variations. But did you catch the key word there? Seemingly. Ultimately, 80 Days has a limited number of outcomes regardless of how varied they may seem at the time, and that's a best case scenario. And your agency isn't just limited by narrative-driven games either. Think of all those times you hit a barrier or boundary while exploring an open level. It's either a conveniently placed pile of debris, an unclimbable mountain blocking your path, or sometimes it's literally just an invisible wall, which is as close to a metaphor for life as you're gonna get. You might have even been intentionally put in an uncomfortable situation by the paradox of player agency. Remember Call of Duty's controversial No Russian mission, or GTA's torture sequence, or the final level in The Last of Us? Those are just a few examples of designers breaking the fourth wall of video games to make you do horribly immoral things you probably didn't want to do. Or at least I hope you did.
Show our contestant what he's won today.
I remember.
And sure, No Russian might have been an optional mission, but that only shows you that the only actual choice you're given in video games is whether to play them or not. People still debate why those creators broke the illusion of agency in those moments, but the important distinction here is that they didn't remove the player's control, they simply stopped pretending you had any in the first place. Many game designers consider illusion of choice a pillar of good design. Aside from illusions that make limited worlds look endless, player agency is also about making the player feel like they have control and choice. That's why a lot of big game studios invest in player tester behavioral data, mathematical models, and even in-house psychologists to make sure you feel and act the way you're supposed to. Let's go back to Telltale's The Walking Dead. Making you feel like your moral and ethical choices matter has little to do with whether or not they actually impact any outcomes, because, spoiler alert, 9 times out of 10, they don't. Just look at this chart from Season 1. Rather than using a branching narrative, Telltale uses a helix model of decision making. Choices momentarily split paths, only to converge right back onto the same linear one shortly thereafter. You only feel like your choices matter because you don't have this chart while playing. All you know is what the game tells you. And what does it tell you? Clementine will remember that. But will she, Telltale? Will she really remember that? But what about more action-oriented games? Surely a first-person shooter gives you more freedom than The Walking Dead, right? Well, first, let's define player agency in this context as the extent you either passively receive information versus actively construct the experience. From Mario to the campaign mode of Call of Duty, the active construction expected of players is still pre-programmed down to the very last enemy. Blasting hordes might feel empowering, but you're essentially a trained circus monkey, jumping through the hoops designers tell you. Chop chop. The only video games that actually invite players to do anything the designer didn't intend are open sandbox games with emergent play or player-generated content, like Minecraft and Civilization. Yet ironically, we rarely think of those games as being about choice. Other games have found the paradox of player agency so unavoidable that they decided to work with the paradox rather than against it. Portal uses the tension behind the player's inherent lack of choice to set the right mood in a story about a computer controlling everything that you do. Hold on one second, I gotta get this. GLaDOS even embodies the concept of game designers as manipulators, forcing you to do increasingly difficult tests for entertainment purposes, messing with your psyche to get you to do what she wants.
The birth parents you are trying to reach do not love you. Please hang up.
In the Stanley Parable, lack of player control is basically the only design principle in the entire game, making the paradox of player choice your only point of interaction with the game system. Funnily enough, for a game about a lack of player choice, Stanley Parable's world seems infinitely more adaptable to the player than most choice-based games. And going back to our example of BioShock Infinite, all of its themes hinge on the paradox of choice, applying the illusion of free will to the real-world principles of Christianity, and the multiverse theories of quantum physics, but I digress. BioShock Infinite isn't wrong. Most real-world scholars and philosophers have been doubting the concept of free will for centuries. Like game systems, humans live in social systems that often cause us to act in predetermined ways. Just look at the influence of gender, religion, and politics on how we view the world. And for a more modern take on how systems influence choices, check out Mike from Idea Channel's recent video about whether or not upvotes are truly democratic. Even our real-world choices might be illusions too. The infamous LIBET experiments revealed that our brains automatically make decisions hundreds of milliseconds before our conscious selves even believe they've started making a choice. And I mean, a promising quantum physics theory actually predicts that what we call reality is most likely just a simulation. I knew it! So, is player agency in games an illusion? In most games, pretty much. But don't forget, games are amazing tools for experiences. That feeling of agency is valuable in and of itself. When done right, game systems can even help us understand and perhaps even master those real-world systems, even if it is just a simulation. So what do you think? Are you playing video games, or are video games playing you? Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you next week. Last week we talked about the tactics and philosophy behind speedrunning. Let's see what you had to say. Scheefinator doesn't really like speedruns. Basically, Scheefinator believes that's cheating, that speedrunners are not playing the game as it meant to be played. What's happening is, as I mentioned in the episode, is that speedrunners are reframing the question, what does it mean to play something? So for most of us, we sit down and play a game and decide to play it as the game designers intended. But for speedrunners, there's really basically one unit of measurement, which is just playing something as quickly as possible. In their own words, the game itself becomes the medium. It's sort of like, I don't know, if you kept the sport of basketball exactly the same, but decided instead of scoring people based on the number of baskets, you scored it by the number of dribbles. I mean, everything would basically be the same equipment, but the way you think about what it means to play that game well is going to be fundamentally different. It's worth noting that there are different types of speedruns. I didn't get into this in the episode, but there are 100% complete speedruns, which is basically playing the game as the designers intended it as quickly as possible, as opposed to just playing it as quickly as possible. Digital Ronin makes another clarification. Again, you know, we don't always have time to go through everything, but specifically pointing out the difference between regular speedruns and tool-assisted speedruns. In tool-assisted speedruns, those are done with special software where they slow down the game to 1/30th of a second, and decisions are sort of made moment by moment and then sort of run through like a movie. It's not a person playing it live, it's a computer program basically executing a series of decisions. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Lttlemoi points out a different subset of speedruns. We didn't get into this in the episode, but there are examples where players basically trick the game into allowing its internal memory to be reprogrammed with the gamepad, which allows for things like credit warps, or being able to beat Super Mario Brothers multiple times from the middle of a level. So those are like a totally other category of like things that you're sort of doing in the world of games that kind of maybe fall under the master category of speedruns. But yeah, people are doing some nutty stuff with games these days.